From the banks of Dewey Lake, it's the Dewey Pod Monster.
All right, welcome back. My name is Sean, and I am the authority on Michigan craft beer. And with me this week, as always, is the original podcast host about consumption, John, host of the Dewey Pod Monster podcast. How are you doing this week, Sean?
Oh, it's going swimmingly, Sean.
Whoever I am. So, my whole purpose was just to throw you off there, so I don't know if that worked or not.
Yeah, a little bit. I called you by your real name, so.
God damn it, Sean.
I know.
God damn it, John.
Exactly.
What have you been watching this week?
Stuff.
Yeah? You want to elaborate on that?
I guess. I watched Little Prince of Pop on Hulu. The Aaron Carter story. It was like an hour-long documentary that was... I know too much about Aaron Carter.
Does it include his death or no?
Yeah.
He just died like
a couple months ago,
didn't he?
No, not weeks. A couple months. I think in February,
They really rushed that production about his death onto
happened yesterday.
Hulu.
So yeah, that was okay. I mean, whatever. I know way too much about Aaron Carter, but they really try to make him a sympathetic guy. And again, I know too much. I don't really want to get into it. I also watched Call Me Miss Cleo, which is a documentary about Miss Cleo, the psychic.
I started that and realized I wasn't in the mood for it and kind of went to something else.
Yeah, it's very I feel like it's kind of the modern day definition of a documentary, where it used to be like old documentaries would tell you kind of an unbiased account of something, whereas this is clearly people who either knew Miss Cleo, they were friends with her or knew her friends or had some kind of connection to her. It felt very, very slanted towards like she was just she was just a victim of all this circumstance. They'd go into her like her being sued for fraud and the company that she worked for, the Psychic somebody network, not Psychic Friends.
Psychic Hotline?
Yeah, but it's like a 3-letter thing. I don't remember. But yeah, so it was okay. Not a great documentary. It was entertaining. One of those ones where you feel like the last like 20, 25 minutes could have just been cut off, because they kind of start going more into her personal life and her death. If you didn't know, she passed away, I think 2016 from cancer. I don't remember which kind of cancer she had. Other than that, I watched UFC.
She didn't see that coming?
She didn't. That's, wow. You must have watched it. You must have watched it, because they use that joke a lot. Well, actually, I think more about her trial than her death, because that's kind of insensitive, right? I watched UFC.
I mean, I'm sure both are insensitive, but UFC
288, Aljamain Sterling versus Triple C, Henry Cejudo. That was the main event. It was all right.
I fell asleep before the main event. You sent me a message saying to watch the main event. I was like, I'm sleeping.
Yeah. And other than that, I watched and started and finished, well, 2 other things, I guess. Watched, started, finished Love on the Spectrum, the United States version on Netflix. That's about people who are dating who have autism. And I watched, it's entertaining. It's like 6 episodes. It's kind of, I don't know. I don't want to say humanizes, but it kind of puts a more personal spin on autism. I guess people that you don't really think of romance and autism, or people who are on the spectrum, basically, looking for mates, but they are, just like everybody. I don't know this, but I would think companionship might be more what people are looking for than just like a physical thing. Yeah. And then other than that, I started a show. It's on Freevee, and it's called Jury Duty. And the way that I can explain it is...
So, please explain, but before you do that, I saw this show being like somewhere saying to watch it, and my initial thought was, that doesn't have Pauly Shore on it. Fuck this.
Oh, say hello to Judge Ito.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, but it's a show, basically, if you've ever seen the Joe Schmo show that was on Spike or whatever it was before that, TNN. It's a guy who is just a regular person. He gets called into jury duty, and he doesn't know, he's not informed that this whole thing is like everyone else there is an actor. So, they're going to get into these outrageous whatever scenarios. The one thing is James Marsden is in this show, and he is playing himself because he's obviously like a recognizable actor. And the guy who they call in for jury duty becomes friends with him. I've only watched the first episode, so they kind of select the jury, and James Marsden's just trying to get out of jury duty any way he can, and other people are trying to get out of it too. But yeah, I don't know I chuckled a couple times. I guess it's from producers of The Office and something else. Like, they're known people who are making the show. So I'll give it a couple more episodes, see if it catches me. But
see if the weasel shows up.
And I've been watching that with the whole family, so it's one of those ones that may take like several months for me to finally finish. So that's what I've been watching. What have you been watching?
I got into a little 6-episode show on Netflix called King Collectibles, which is kind of like a Pawn Stars knockoff, but it is essentially like Jersey Shore Castaways, kind of running the whole Pawn Star type thing through like online auctions, not eBay necessarily, but their own auctions. It focuses really, really heavy on any type of trading card, like to a point where I just don't fucking care. But it's only 6 episodes long, so I powered through it. I don't know that I would really want to watch that again or watch more of it. But for whatever reason, if you have people going places and just finding other people's shit and being like, oh, this is actually really valuable, I can find mild interest in that.
Is Logan Paul in that? Is Logan Paul in that? Is Logan Paul in that show?
I don't believe so.
Opening Pokemon cards? I saw a preview. He was opening Pokemon cards.
He is. No, you're right. I thought Logan Paul was someone else because I'm an idiot. But yes, he is in that. Only in one episode though. He's not in it like on a regular basis. Peyton Manning pops up a couple times and is very foreheady. Trying to think if there's anyone else that would be recognizable that's in it, and not that's coming to mind. It's not great, but it's kind of looking at. It's like going to the thrift store and finding that random thing that's like worth picking up. But you're dealing with Jersey Shore cast-offs that are like scouring the internet for these things. Movie that might be of interest for actually the other 2 things I watched, both of them, one of them definitely, but both might be of interest for future topics. One is the Mason Brothers Midnight Zombie Massacre, which I think I told you a little bit about this, but the short version of this is how it was sold to me, and this is how I'll sell it to you, is wrestlers and zombies. Not actual wrestlers, but like fictional wrestlers doing wrestling things, and zombies show up. It's a very B movie, for lack of better wording, but it's not without its charm. It's got some, wrestling and some zombies. What else do you really fucking need?
Yeah, it's everything right there.
Well, the best thing I watched this week by far is the movie Star Slammer.
Is that about Pogs?
Yes.
Nice.
I'm not going to go into this in detail because this is, whether we get a response on this or not, it's probably going to be something that I'm going to demand that we talk about more, kind of like you did with Gene Simmons and Ragnar. Just, this is the little prelude, or not prelude, that's a dumb thing, little synopsis of this that's on Tubi right now, and this is what sold me to turn it on. 2 women fight off lesbian guards, crazed wardens, and mutant rodents as they struggle to rally their fellow inmates and escape the prison planet. I mean, if that doesn't sell itself, I don't know what does.
You posted clips about this on Twitter or something, right?
I replied to someone with it, so you'd have to really go digging for it, but I sent them to you directly, I think.
I don't know. I saw it. It looked amazing. It looks like something we're going to have to talk about.
Oh, no, it is absolutely amazing. It is one of the most utterly ridiculous movies I've seen in at least 2 weeks, and it totally deserves a full Dewey Pod Monster podcast treatment.
That's good, because I could use a break.
Well, we only have one request left after that, but this week we are in request month, and this week's request, the topic for the week, is the movie Tusk, which was requested by Brittany. Her handle on Instagram is Live Hiking, and she demanded that we talk about this movie because it's something of a classic. We'll go with that.
I'll reserve what kind of classic I think it is at the end of this episode.
At the end of this episode?
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like we'll have some conversation about this. There's no clowns in this movie, so that's a plus.
Is it?
Right. For generally. So we start off movies with a synopsis and with our third-party reviews. I'll do the reviews first. I have 3 of them this time, and they're all equally just drawn out, so it lets you know how much time we'll eat up. First review is a 4-star review from Rowan D. His review is very well stated. He says, definitely a film, for sure.
How many is this out of 10?
4 out of 5. These are all on Rotten Tomatoes.
Okay.
I like pulling these from Rotten Tomatoes because a lot of people don't write books on Rotten Tomatoes, or IMDb. They think they're writing a thesis about Tusk. Come on. It's probably not necessary.
Amateur film critics. Bunch of jerks.
Anonymous person says, 5 stars. Holy shit. Best comedy movie of all time. Nothing?
My silence should be deafening.
Another anonymous person says, such a surreal and bizarre film. Jesus, A+ for me. No stars. Wait, no.
Did they leave the stars off, or?
I don't know. I thought you had to put stars in.
Yeah, I would have thought so. At least one. I mean, most of the places when they don't let you rate 0.
So before we go into the synopsis, were you surprised to see the A24 logo on this movie? Because I saw this movie. I saw this in theaters when it came out, and I don't know if I just wasn't really aware of A24 at that time, or didn't care, or both. But when I saw the A24 on the front, this was like, no fucking way. This is like the least A24-y type movie that I've seen of their catalog.
When I saw A24 show up before the actual title screen, I thought to myself, I wrote a note. I was like, this is the earliest example of an A24 movie that I know. I think the first A24 movie that I really realized that it was a thing was Ex Machina, and I know that's not one of their earliest ones. This came out in 2014. I actually looked up what the A24 film catalog was.
Did they just erase this from it?
No, it's on here. It's on there. It was hard to find. Like, they don't tell you exactly. There's like a different. There's 2 different entries on Wikipedia for A24. There's like, they show their television shows, which I didn't know that they had produced any television shows.
I know they're producing that new Friday the 13th show that's supposed to come out, I think it's next year. I didn't know they had done any prior to that, though.
Yeah, they did like Fireside. I've never heard of these shows. Fireside Chat with Esther, Playing House. The only show that I've heard of on this list is The Carmichael Show, which is Gerard Carmichael's TV show, and he has 2. They did 2 Dope Queens. That was 2018. I mean, there's a lot of shows on here that I'm not super familiar with, but the movie part. So the first movie, okay, this is familiar now. The first movie that they produced was in 2013, A Glimpse Inside the Mind of Charles Swan III by Roman Coppola. And then Ginger and Rosa in 2013. Spring Breakers is probably the first big one.
That's an A24 movie?
Yeah. And then The Bling Ring, Enemy, Under the Skin. I mean, there are movies I'm skipping, but movies I've actually heard of. The Rover, that's 2014. Tusk is like, looks like the 13th movie they were involved in, which, yeah, I was super, to get back to your question, your original question, I was really surprised to see A24 on here. I was like, I did not know that Kevin Smith had some kind of deal with Kevin Smith to do this movie. It just seemed kind of out of the ordinary. And I think this is like right after he was doing all the, like, Red State was right before this. Right.
Yeah. This is after he claimed he was going to stop doing major studio films. And I guess at this point, A24 probably wouldn't have been considered a major studio. But he was going to stop doing major studio films. He was on the outs with the Weinsteins. We know a lot more about that now than we did then. He was pissed off at critics in general. And I'm pretty sure this is around the time that he really discovered weed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'll get into that. So, you want me to do the storyline?
Yeah, let's go into the synopsis before we forget about doing that.
Lose the thread on it. Yeah, so I'm going to skip the plot, which is the top one, I think, on imdb.com. If you go to Tusk's entry on IMDb, the storyline reads, when podcaster Wallace travels to Canada to interview someone, he winds up meeting a strange man named Howe, who has many stories to tell about his past life during his interview. Wallace wakes up the next day finding out Howe isn't the person he thought he was. Howe has plans to surgically and mentally turn Wallace into a walrus.
Wallace the Walrus.
What is the name? Itself. Mr. Tusk?
Mr. Tusk.
Mr. Tusk.
Yeah. So, to give a little backstory on this movie, what little backstory there needs to be, this is based off a Kevin Smith podcast from his initial... Oh, you're shaking your head no at me? You don't want to hear this?
No, it's fine. I mean, it is what it is.
So this is off his initial, like, actual podcast, not the, like, 50 others that he does now. If you want to dig it out of the archives, it's Smodcast number 259, and it's The Walrus and the Carpenter. And basically what you'll hear on that podcast is Kevin Smith and Scott Mosier just very... I assume that at least Kevin Smith is stoned. I don't know if Mosier is or isn't, but a very high Kevin Smith just going off on a tangent about a guy turning a person into a walrus. It somehow evolved into this movie. If
you watch this movie to the end, in the credits, about halfway through the credits, they play the clip. It's an edited clip of the show where they talk about, how they come up with the idea for this movie, or how Kevin Smith comes up with the idea. Mosier has some input on it as well. So it's actually included at the end. If you've listened, I listened to Smodcast, I think, for a little while, and then I stopped for some reason. I don't know why, but I think it was probably just because
I stopped because Scott Mosier stopped being on it, and Mosier's the funnier of the two of them.
Yeah, I think Kevin Smith was just talking about weed constantly. This is when he had just, like, as a 40-year-old man or a 35-year-old man or whatever, had just, like, discovered weed, and that's all he talked about. So, yeah. And I watched some things, you know, we talk about Kevin Smith, we have talked about Kevin Smith in the past. We don't always talk about him, but I realized why he makes that, like, look, like he's always doing that thing with his hands. I just watched a thing on YouTube. It was, like, him talking about his abuse as a child, his sexual abuse. I don't know if you've heard, like, the story of that.
I think I don't know if we brought it up on the show, but I know I talked to you about it specifically like a week ago. It wasn't on the show. I said, I don't know if I want to do this episode now because Kevin Smith's like out with the sob story in the media that just came out. Always
known for a sensitivity on this show. Long story short, he talks with his hands a lot. And he does those gestures like he's always doing he does that with his hands when he talks. I saw it in the People video on YouTube. I mean, it was like, it's distracting to watch him. Anyways, back to the show.
I thought you were getting to a point other than the hands thing.
No, that's just the hands. Let's talk about the movie. In the movie, Wallace, who's played by Justin Long, and Haley Joel Osment plays his friend. What was his friend's name?
Other guy.
Gary?
Sure.
What is his name? I need to know.
Teddy.
His friend Teddy, played by Haley Joel Osment, they have a podcast, and they like to go and interview people who are, like, internet infamous for whatever. So Justin's going to Canada to interview a kid that it's basically the Star Wars kid, but it's
Kill Bill.
Yeah, the Kill Bill kid, and he, like, cuts his leg off. I gotta say, this podcast that they record, I really hope that we don't have. I'm, like, cringing thinking about we have, like, anyone would ever confuse what we do to be something as they basically, like, riff on internet jokes and videos and stuff. This is the most obnoxious podcast of all time. Like, I would never listen to this podcast. I didn't laugh during any of the stuff where they're hysterically laughing at all this stuff that they're talking about.
Whole Nazi party thing, and it's not Nazi.
Yeah.
You know,
oh, yeah. I wasn't even going to bring that up.
That thing, like, and they do it almost up until he can't talk anymore in the fucking movie. Actually, they do it until he can't talk anymore in the movie. Every time I'm like, who the fuck thinks that's a good idea?
Or
like,
funny.
That's
maybe it's a sign of the times, but
I mean, that's the most, like, cringe edgelord, like, oh, look at me, I'm so badass, I'm talking like this on the, like, they do a really good job of making you not give a shit that Justin Long gets turned into a walrus in this movie.
And just for context for the listeners, if you haven't seen Tusk, again, spoiler alert, we're gonna shit all over, I don't know, we're gonna shit spoilers all over this movie. But the name of the podcast is the Nazi Party. It's NOT-SEE Party. And they have all this merch and all this artwork and stuff all around their quote unquote studio that they show. They have a few scenes in the studio, and it's just like, I don't know. Kevin Smith had a successful podcast at this point. Is this
several? Because the ringtone in this is from a different podcast of his. A lot of the character actors in this are, you know, obviously there's his wife and his daughter in this, but, like, the first detective, not Johnny Depp, the other detective, that's one of his podcasts, like, partner. Or,
is that Ralph Garman?
Yes.
Oh, he was on the Joe Schmo show.
He was
as the host. Full circle.
Yeah, he's the podcast that they did. Garman and Kevin Smith did was, I don't know how big it was, but it was pretty popular at the time when this movie came out. And I mean, there's a ton of inside jokes that are, like, just peppered through this entire movie from his other podcasts.
Maybe that's why I didn't laugh at all. Maybe I just didn't understand that these were supposed to be inside jokes, and they used their outside voices to tell them. The podcast, because we record a podcast, these guys have the worst microphone technique of all time. I don't know how they can even get recorded. Not that we're, like, experts by any means, but I like to think that we know how to talk into a microphone. And they'll have Justin Long will be like, it'll be like above the pop screen. He's talking into it. It's like, what's the thing there? Like Kevin Smith, like we said, had several successful podcasts. So you would think that he would want to be able to represent this on film the right way, you know?
Nah. Is there anything you like about this movie before we go to your proverbial turd part of the podcast?
The only... This is very measured, what I'm going to say.
Do you want me to counterpoint you before you even say it?
Well, do you know what I'm going to say?
No.
No, I'll say, you asked the question. I'll tell you what I liked about the movie. The only thing that I even like in a minute amount, which compared to the rest of the movie was gold, was Johnny Depp as the French Canadian, the Quebecois detective.
That actually surprises me. I've heard a lot of people say that he's the worst part of this movie, which he doesn't bother me in this, but that surprises me.
When he first comes on screen, I knew he looked familiar, and I don't look at the cast list generally when we watch these movies. And I saw that he was in the cast. Well, I was like, who is that? And I looked at the cast list. I could kind of place him, and I wasn't quite sure. The only thing in this entire movie that I actually thought was even remotely amusing, like anything in the entire movie, is when Johnny Depp as the French Canadian detective says that the situation that Wallace is in is a fuck of a bummer, and that's a quote. That's the only thing I even smiled at.
I wrote that quote down to use for whatever we post about this episode. So I'm with you on that quote. You know what? I love Michael Parks in this movie. I think he's great in this movie. So Michael Parks plays. We should backtrack. So we mentioned what this podcast in the movie is about. It's about these guys basically shitting on internet people or internet sensations. Justin Long decides he's going to go up to Canada to meet this guy who cut his own leg off, and in the time that he gets there, the kid has killed himself, which is almost like, I think it's supposed to be a joke, but does not land at all if it's supposed to be funny.
It's supposed to be a joke?
The way they present it, I feel like it's supposed to be a joke, but they
do try to play it for laughs, but I just don't find anything funny about somebody who becomes like internet infamous killing themselves because they've been shamed to death. Like,
I agree with you. So as they're doing this, Justin Long goes to take a leak in this bar, trying to, I guess, salvage his trip to Canada, and finds this like sketchy letter over the urinal saying basically, hey, I'm an old man, I got some stories, come live with me, you know. So what does he do? He goes and, gets a big gulp and goes and talks to Kevin Smith and Johnny Depp's daughters, gets directions to this guy's house, and decides, I'm going to go 2 hours into bumfuck nowhere and hang out with this old dude.
I thought that having Kevin Smith's daughter, Johnny Depp's daughter, and having Kevin Smith's wife be in this movie so little was actually a plus. It showed a lot of restraint because he's really tried to push his wife and his kid in different movies. So I got to give him praise, as small as it may be, for just using them sparingly.
Hopefully we don't have to watch the sequel then. I don't remember how much his wife is in the sequel, but his daughter's the lead in the sequel.
I'm sorry. There's a sequel to this movie?
Oh, there's 3. The third one's not done yet because it's Kevin Smith and he takes forever to do anything. But second movie is Yoga Hosers.
Oh, okay.
Which...
It's not called Tusk 2.
No.
Okay.
They only show the walrus in it for like maybe 20 seconds, if I remember. I only watched it once. It was for all the people that say that this is Kevin Smith's worst movie. This movie makes Yoga Hosers and Clerks 3, for that matter, look... Actually, those 2 movies make this movie look good. I backed that up wrong. Anyway, yeah, I would rather watch this than Yoga Hosers or Clerks 3. And we still have to talk about that shithole sometime. So anyway, he goes to get directions from 2 clerks that happen to be Kevin Smith and Johnny Depp's daughter, goes out into the middle of nowhere and meets Howard Howe, who is played by Michael Parks. If you don't know Michael Parks, watch any Tarantino or Robert Rodriguez movie. He's the cop. Every single one of them. Or one of the 2 cops. He's the sheriff. I can't remember the sheriff's name in those movies, but he's a reoccurring role in both their movies, and every single one of them, all the way back to From Dusk Till Dawn, if I remember right. So essentially, he goes into this house, gets offered some tea, and shocker, the guy in the middle of nowhere drugs him, and we're off to the walrus race. Fair?
Yeah.
Okay. So does Michael Parks chew the shit out of some scenery in this movie. Yes, absolutely. Especially after Justin Long, fillets his walrus dong and, gets knocked out and you don't feel bad about it. But the level of lunacy that Michael Parks brings to this role, it's just restrained enough and just crazy enough to kind of make it feel, I don't want to say it's believable, but entertaining to me.
I guess I could give some props begrudgingly to Michael Parks in this movie because I didn't like him as a character, and I think
I don't think you're supposed to.
No, I don't either. But I thought he was like extremely annoying after a while. But I think everybody else in this movie, I mean, I guess Haley Joel Osment and the woman that plays Wallace's girlfriend,
Rodriguez.
Yeah,
who I don't know if she's
Allie.
in anything else. Yeah,
I guess they're okay, but they try to put this, for her specifically, they try to put this real emotional spin, like, since Wallace, they build this backstory. They don't really tell you about it, but they build this backstory of Wallace used to be this nice guy, and now that his podcast has become popular, he becomes an asshole. Like, he kind of totally changes to accommodate the people. Like, he realizes being like a shock comic or whatever is getting him more fans than when he was himself, when he wasn't funny. I guess those three people, Michael Parks, Genesis Rodriguez, and Haley Joel Osment, and Johnny Depp, are serviceable in the movie. I guess there's nothing really wrong with them, but I feel like because the movie to me was so devoid of joy, like there was nothing fun that happens in this movie. I didn't find like there was anything fun. It kind of puts this sour note on all the performances because the movie to me is just so unlikable.
I'm going to disagree. When Michael Parks puts on the walrus costume and tries to fight him, I thought that was pretty fun.
Yeah, not me. I was so just ready for this to be over that it was like, oh my God.
So this is actually to your point, even though you didn't say it. Basically, when this movie starts, you're almost like Kevin Smith is almost trying to build tension in this movie up until Justin Long gets knocked out. And once he gets knocked out, the train is off the rails from that point forward. Like, everything is over the top. Everything is like at Al Pacino levels of volume. Everything is becoming exceedingly less and less believable. And you have to kind of choose when you watch a movie like this, do I want to go along for the ride or do I want to get annoyed by this? Because it is stupid. Like, there's no real arguing that. It is a stupid movie, but if you're okay with going off the rails and watching that, I can see it where the entertainment value is in it.
I think it just gets to the point for me where,
There's actual smoke coming off of Sean's head.
No. I'm trying to think of like, yeah, maybe from thought. What I'm trying to think of, basically, as we're talking about this movie, like going back, I don't have any animosity towards it. I don't have any anger towards it really at all. I'm just very indifferent. But while watching it, I can tell you, I was super annoyed. I wanted it to be over. Like I said, there's just no. I have a literal note that I wrote, and I think it's about an hour into the movie, and it says, "I'm getting no joy out of this movie." There's just nothing that's going on that is like redeeming to it.
That's right on par with my Mario note of like, Jesus Christ, there's an hour left of this movie.
It's a long movie, but I guess, I mean, a lot of it is that I think it's an hour and 40 plus minutes, and I think it's a lot of it.
Hour 42, you're right. Okay.
They show a lot of stuff. It's Kickstarted, so they have a lot of people that were Kickstarter backers. They have the part where they include the Smodcast part, so you can hear the conversation, which I did think was a nice touch, that you could hear where the inception of the idea of the movie came along. But it's just so like I said, there's just no joy. There's nothing. I don't know. It's like they just had this really thin premise and something that's totally non-workable. When you see the walrus costume, Wallace he's a walrus, right? I mean, there's like pieces of other people's
it's not really a costume at this point.
Yeah, he's like stitched up, and just like think about the logistics behind that made me upset. I've had surgery. You don't just move around like that with all these stitches and shit all over you. It doesn't heal like that. Doesn't work like that. I realize it's supposed to be silly. And I realized that it was done in fun, but none of that fun was translated into the movie, because at this point, I'm just so annoyed with these characters that I'm looking at things like, that is stupid. That wouldn't work like that. You know what I mean? You get There's so many movies that we watch. You know, I watch Marvel movies. I haven't watched any recently, but you watch Marvel movies. That shit isn't ever going to happen. You know, you suspend your belief, right? That
sure,
this stuff's going to happen, and you just kind of go along with it, like you're saying. You just kind of go along for the ride.
There's a good 50% of movies that you have to kind of suspend belief if you want to. You have to choose if you want to enjoy the movie or not, or choose to. Well, maybe that's a strong take, but you have to choose if you're going to allow yourself to go down the story that the movie's telling you.
Yeah, and I think that with this is we have you kick it off with the laughing maniacally on the podcast about stuff that's not funny. The CGI that they do with the Kill Bill kid and he cuts his leg off is not good. It doesn't look... You can tell that they're ripping off...
it's right on par with Sharkula.
Yeah, you can tell that they're ripping off the Star Wars kid thing, so that's like another thing. Like, don't you have any original ideas? Like, you could just do something else. It doesn't have to be, well, instead of calling him the Star Wars kid, because that's who everybody that has any point of reference to this knows that's what you're talking about. We're going to call it the Kill Bill kid because nobody remembers what the fuck that is. Like, who, Kill Bill, okay, Quentin Tarantino, sure. He goes to Canada. The Border Patrol guy, not amusing. Like, I didn't find that amusing at all. I was just kind of like, I'm trying to look for something that I'm going to enjoy out of this.
Maybe if he ate like a 500-pound hamburger or something, You're not catching the joke, are you? He's the epic mealtime guy.
Yeah, I never watched that either.
You're not missing much. It's pretty gross.
Well, now they don't really do it, right?
I don't know.
I think it's over.
I stopped. I never really got that into it. I was just like, this just seems like a waste of animal.
Yeah.
So
it's a way to blow your heart out. Like you said, I didn't know that this was... I didn't know going into this that there were supposed to be all these inside jokes. Maybe if I knew some of the inside jokes, I would have thought some of it was funny. But going into it dry, like no lube, this was not a good movie to go into with no lube, to like not know what's going on.
To go into it. So when we talked about doing this last week, I had said the one thing I can give this movie ahead of time is that this is a different tone from every other Kevin Smith movie that preceded it. I'm not talking about the stuff that necessarily came after it. Now, I hadn't watched this in almost 10 years before this week. It's been a while. I will say, this is what I don't know for sure. The humor that he goes for in this movie now just feels like Kevin Smith humor to me now in 2023. I don't remember feeling that way when I saw it in 2014 when this came out. It felt like what I remember saying was like, the one thing I'll give this movie is that Kevin Smith tried to do something different here. He tried to do something that wasn't going to be Chasing Amy or Jane Silent Bob or whatever. And to an extent, I think that's commendable. Like, he kind of went outside his comfort zone. Like, he could have easily made another Jane Silent Bob movie where they run around, I don't know, a soccer stadium and got high and got into shenanigans and probably would have made more money than what he made off of this. But he didn't. He chose to make a movie where he turns Justin Long into a walrus, and for better or worse, this is the result. Did I oversell that in retrospect?
To yourself or to me?
No, to you.
I don't think you sold this to me at all. I mean, I knew what... It wasn't meant to be funny. I don't know if, I don't know... Do you mean... So when you say about the Kevin Smith part and the humor, do you mean his humor now? This reflects more of his humor now?
I think it does in retro... looking at it for the first time in 10 years, I think this reflects his humor now more than what it was in 2014 when this came out. When 2014, when this came out, I was expecting a super dialogue heavy, lot of dick and cum jokes. And there's some dick and cum jokes in this movie. It's not like it's devoid of them, but it's not like the dialogue you would have expected from
any View Askew-averse kind of stuff.
Yeah, let's take out Cop Out and let's take out Red State. Those are a whole different thing altogether. But the first 5, it's got none of that in it, in my opinion.
In that first scene where Wallace meets Mr. Howard Howe, and they're talking, before the tea, like at the tea kind of. Yeah. I did think to myself, this is not the normal Kevin Smith dialogue that you would hear. Like, if you watch the View Askew-averse stuff with Ben Affleck, and they have that kind of like they're reading off the page dialogue, and a lot of it is because the actors aren't real actors. I mean, they're not like classically trained actors. They're friends of his, and that's just... Well,
they're also reading dialogue that is way really longer dense. Than that you're not going to easily remember off the top of your head.
And this seems very, very different. Again, you have actors, people who are actors, probably one of the few, at this point in his career, one of the few movies that he had people that weren't either friends of his, industry friends of his. I mean, I don't know what other stuff of Kevin Smith's Justin Long had been in, but I feel like he's kind of
Zack and Miri.
Okay.
Which was before this. I don't think he's in Red State.
But he's become like a stable kind of person for Kevin Smith.
I think the only people that were in Red State for this was Michael Parks and Ralph outside of his family. I'm not counting his wife and his kid or whatever. But I think Garman and Parks are the only two that are also in Red State. I could be wrong about that, but the only two that stick out in my head.
So, to your point, I did feel like it was commendable that it didn't feel like dialogue-wise. Really much of anything in this movie felt like a Kevin Smith movie because, I mean, even since he's made movies in the View Askew-averse, I think that's what they call it. So there have been other movies in that kind of vein, but this didn't feel like it. I mean, I guess, like you said, it's commendable that he decided to do something different with his career. Because I think, I don't think he tried to retire the View Askew-averse, and obviously we get the Clerks 2. I think that was before this.
Clerks 2 was before this, yeah.
But so he's really pulling away from it.
Yeah, since this we had, again, Yoga Hosers, which is, again, you think this movie's off the rails. Don't even bother with that.
I won't. Don't worry.
Say that now. And then you have Jane Silent Bob Reboot, which I found, you said you found no joy in this. I found like no joy in that movie.
Did that come out in 2022 or I'm sorry, 2020, like right around the beginning of the pandemic or right?
I remember watching it like, I want to say like fall of 2020. I know I watched it at home on Amazon. I don't remember because he's been doing his like when he has a movie to take out now, he does the like independent theater tour thing because he seems to think I need to listen to him talk about his movie for 3 hours after he shows me his
movie. Meet and greet or the question answer kind of thing.
Yeah, which is kind of cool if his movies were more interesting, but I don't feel like there's enough like to really dive into with a Kevin Smith movie to need a 3-hour dissertation after it about why Jay like made a blowjob joke or whatever. So he did that, and then he did Clerks 3. I think that's the only 3 movies that he's done since then. He has a anthology film where I know he threw money at the whole thing, but he only like directed up, I think it's 4 stories. It could be something like that. He only directed one of the stories, and however many is in this Kevin Smith Creepshow type spinoff thing. But he hasn't been doing stuff like, he's not cranking out a movie like every other year like some directors do. He's not a David Gordon Green or, whoever that has like a quota he has to put out every 24 months, it seems like.
Good for him.
Yep. Sure. Do you have anything you want to add on this? I mean, I don't know that there's really a whole lot more we can say. There's a walrus. Again, a lot of scene chewing. I like Michael Parks in this. Much past that, I don't know what else we can really say.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I won't talk about what the ending is, but the end is a little sad, but I didn't really understand. Like,
you're talking about the very end, like after the very end, the fight?
Yes, but okay. The thing that I don't understand, maybe you can shed some light on, and maybe I just missed it. So when they talk about he has multiple victims that he's tried to turn into walruses, right? And he's trying to basically, he had this companion, he was shipwrecked, for lack of a better term. I feel like that's like the phrase of the day for me today. Lack of a better term, or a more interesting way to say it.
I say it all the time, so don't worry about it.
The victims all have holes in the roof of their mouth. Why is that?
So I don't know, but I always assumed he only had one pair of tusks. So after the previous experiment dies, he takes the tusk off and puts them on the next experiment.
Yeah, but I think they said specifically that they had holes in the roof of their mouth. And I just didn't understand what could have been over my head. Like, I don't know what the significance of that is, if there is any. Maybe there's not.
It's Kevin Smith. It's probably no. I'm over it. There's no significance at this point.
Okay,
so.
That's the only thing I had to add on to it.
Okay. Well, why don't you lead us off with hot dogs? Because I got a feeling you're gonna, or do you want me to go first?
No, I can go first, I guess.
All right.
I guess I'll start off by saying this is my least like Kevin Smith movie.
Oh, you got to watch Yoga Hosers, son.
Do I have to? I would say we've talked off mic. We haven't done anything formal or official about it. But I would watch Clerks 3 like every day into infinity rather than watch Tusk again. I thought it was miserable. I was miserable watching it. I thought the movie was miserable. I didn't think it was. I've said it a few times. There was no joy. Found no joy in this movie. And I feel like the movie didn't benefit from Kevin Smith being high all the time at the time. I'm really glad that him and Scott Mosier had so much fun talking about making this movie, because unfortunately all the fun that they had talking about making the movie took all the fun out of it for me. I would say, wow, this is probably one of the worst movies that I've seen this year. And that's saying, we've talked about so many movies, and we talked, I think it was included in the last episode, but I know that we talked and said, can we watch something that's not soul crushing? And we unfortunately had to watch another movie, to me, that's soul crushing. Brittany, I don't understand, Brittany, why you hate me so much. Why you make me watch this movie. I blame you. And I would say I'm going to have to give this, wow, I don't know what my lowest of rating this year has been, but this is going to be 2.5 walrus whiskers out of 11 hot dogs for me.
Okay. So I don't think this movie's aged well. Like, I remember finding this to be more interesting or more entertaining of a movie the first time I saw it than the second time. That being said, everything you said negative about, or positive about Clerks, or all the things you said why you would rather watch Clerks, I feel the exact same way about this. I would rather watch this a million times over Clerks, because Clerks 3 gave me no joy, and this at least had a couple things I could kind of find moderate entertainment in. Again, I believe this is Michael Park's last movie that he was in, if I remember right, before he passed. I think he passed shortly, like either shortly after this came out, or like in the interim between when they finished filming it and when it actually came out. Kind of like Ray Liotta. I don't know if this is what you want your legacy to be as your last film, but, well, there's no cocaine bears in this movie, so it's what you get. Anyway, Michael Parks is great in this. I do find the casting of Johnny Depp to be pretty entertaining. The Canada jokes kind of run thin, like they feel forced. The writing isn't great, and this would be similar to like a lot of movies that we've talked about before, a movie that would have really benefited from, whether it's a director or a writer or someone who can flesh out this idea in a more interesting way. It would have made it a stronger movie. But I give it credit for going outside its comfort zone and trying something different and just being a weird fucking movie. For me, it's kind of right down the middle. It's five, what's his name? 5 Guy Lapointe dick nose looking prosthetics out of 10 hot dogs. It's worth watching once. If you like weird monster gross out movies, you'll probably find an interest in this. If you don't, I don't know why you would even be interested in this movie to begin with. And this is really going to push your limits on what you think about Kevin Smith, for better or worse.
I think for my last word, and not the last word, but my last word, I thought the costume, the whatever you want to call it, looked pitifully awful. I thought it looked like shit. I thought it was like one of the worst like monster costumes I've ever seen.
I thought that was intentional, though.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I thought it was a nice touch that this is supposed to be skinned, like people skinned and had ears and noses and whatever from other people, like on his back and all this shit. But otherwise, I thought it looked just like not even passable for something that I would be ashamed if this was the thing that like this was representing my movie and had the money that Kevin Smith had to spend on this movie.
Question of the week. So last week's question of the week was, what comic book property would you like to see rebooted? This was Sean's idea, and we did get some actual answers.
What are you talking about? We got actual answers last time.
These are even more actual.
Oh, okay.
So
got it.
Our friend Sam at To Be or Not To Be Movies and Feature Creature DTF had said, as far as what comic book property he would like to see rebooted, he said, might be a shitty answer, but none. Like, Spider-Man has had 3 reboots just in my lifetime. I'm burnt out on this shit.
That's fair.
Seth Vargas at Sethi has said, hasn't been made into a movie yet, but I would love to see any adaptation of Savage Dragon. I can agree with that. It's a weird 90s, like, super Todd McFarlane comic. I don't know if he wrote it, but it's a Image comic.
Mm-hmm. He probably had a hand in it if it's on Image.
Yeah, it's on Image around the time when Spawn was in his little We Don't Like Marvel feud or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, Two Guys on Friday podcast. You can follow them at Two Guys on Friday. It's a Deadly Friend. And I was like, is that a comic book? He goes, oh, I didn't read the question completely. So
yeah, I was going to say, I didn't think that was a comic.
I didn't either, but I like that he had put it in there. So I included it anyway, because
why not?
Well, we probably need to talk about Deadly Friend at some point. I've shared that damn basketball gif like 5 times at least. So,
and Sam, I know where you're coming from, But this was more in the spirit of like crappy old comic book movie, like we talked about the Nick Fury with David Hasselhoff and Captain America and Fantastic Four. To be fair, Fantastic Four has been rebooted several times and they've all fucking stunk. So, yeah.
I didn't answer last week, so my answer is probably one that, in retrospect, I should have seen coming. Tales from the Crypt. Comic book series was a great show in the 80s, 90s. I think it was 90s. I don't think you need, whether you're going to do it as a like anthology movie, do the Creep Show take and do 3-4 stories and then do another movie, or just do it as another TV show. I don't care. I want Tales from the Crypt back.
Yeah, that'd be good. We are lacking horror shows on TV. I mean, we've got American Horror Story.
Lacking good horror shows.
Yes.
American Horror Story is, well,
that's what we get.
yeah, I'm not a fan of American Horror Story. Even the one full season, I think I bitched about it for like half an episode.
Yeah, I do remember that. So are we ready for this week's question of the week?
Let's do it.
All right. So for this week, the question of the week is there a director that you quote unquote like, but you don't actually like their movies? Is there a director out there that you feel like, hey, when I see a movie by so-and-so, I'm going to go see that movie, but generally you're not into their movies?
I could go the opposite way real easy. Like, there's a director that I like his movies, but I don't like that director. Like, I get the, like sometimes you don't know a person, but you're like, just get that scuzzy feeling by watching them. I have one of those.
Is it Vincent Gallo? Oh.
He's much more popular than that.
Vincent Gallo is?
No, the director I'm thinking of is much more popular.
Do you want to answer it this week or you want to wait till next week?
I'm going to have to wait till next week because I can't think of one. Do you want my answer for the opposite question?
Yeah, why not?
Quentin Tarantino creeps me out. I feel like that dude's got all kinds of skeletons in his closet and the whole feet fetish that he keeps putting on there. I don't like it.
Not your
Great
bag.
movies.
Not my bag, baby.
He's only got one movie that I don't really like that much, but
let's hear
most of his movies are.
What is it?
Not his last one, the one before that.
Inglourious Bastards?
No, after that, after Django, Hateful Eight. I didn't like that one.
Oh, okay. I don't like Inglourious Bastards, but I really like Hateful Eight, so take that for what it's worth.
Okay, so I got to think about a director I like but don't like his movies. All right.
Yeah, and you can tell me next week because I don't have an answer either. But if you have an answer out there, listening audience, you can answer us at crap.town, or you can answer us on any of our social media at Dewey Pod Monster.
That's right. So, and if you're interested in looking at or learning about craft beer or Michigan craft beer, you can find all the craft beer content at Draft Therapy on YouTube or at Draft Therapy on all the social media, and send messages about where you want us to talk, who you want us to talk to about craft beer, preferably in Michigan, because I don't think out of state road trips are on the agenda right now.
Not for the moment, but I was going to say something. Oh yeah. And YouTube has implemented the ad handle, so works out perfectly.
True. All right. Well, now that I've thoroughly confused us at the beginning and the end of the show, I think that's all we got for the week. So we will talk to you next week. Between now and then, hit us up, answer the question of the week, let us know what you thought of this, have some beers, and if you see Kevin Smith, tell him #Walrus. We are recording. All right, you ready to go?
Like Bruce Buffer said. I don't think that's what Bruce Buffer said, but...
All right, we're off to a good start.